Before I get into the video, here's a quick shout out to a new channel, Beyond the Reef. His series is about the setup of a budget 40 breeder, and I'm pretty impressed with what he's learned about doing videos just in the last few weeks, since he'd never done it before. He's been in salt water for a while, and you'll probably enjoy the ingenuity that he's demonstrating in what he's done so far, so check it out. I recently added 2 non-photosynthetic gorgonians to my tank, in addition to this Corky sea finger that I already had in, which is doing really well. Corky sea finger, by the way, I just learned, is pretty near the top of the list for emitting noxious substances into the water. And this emitting of noxious substances into the water was also a surprise to me. I knew they shed periodically, such as this red tree gorgonian is doing right now, but I had no idea what they actually put into the water was so toxic to the other corals in the tank. But it's not just toxins from gorgonians. I've been battling phosphate probably for about 8 months now. They've been high as 0.34. And while I had this phosphate issue going on, I also went and added those gorgonians. In the past, I've always used media such as Phosphate or carbon in media bags and put them in the sump and hoped that there was enough flow for them to be effective. But it was becoming obvious that just wasn't cutting it. I had heard about media reactors, of course, but to tell you the truth, the name made me nervous. Reactor. It sounded scary. And I figured they might be complicated, and I try to avoid complicated if there's any way I can. And as luck would have it, I stumbled across this, a baby reactor. So I bought one. It's called the Nano Tumbler. This one is made by CPR Aquatic Inc., and the reason I chose a nano tumbler is because I'm extremely limited for space in my sump. It comes with its own pump, and I'm going to show you something now that's going to be important later on, although when I bought it, I didn't think so at the time. It's the fine media kit, and this is so that really fine media doesn't make its way out of the chamber and back siphon into the pump or flow out of the top and into the return chamber and into your return pump and thus into your tank. I bought this thing because I thought, I might as well have it since it is an accessory, and you always regret the things you don't buy when you suddenly change your mind about what you're going to do. So that's why I got the fine media kit to go along with this thing. So let's get it out of the box. As I was going through and taking everything out and taking it apart and looking at it, it really struck me how frequently there were warnings about making sure to use the fine media kit with fine media. So obviously this was a problem at some point. So here's the pump, the Rio 90. All the reviews I read said the 90 was underpowered for this reactor and that you should just not use it and replace it with the 180. But I'm going to go ahead and give the 90 a try to start with. One thing I'd like to point out is how sturdy this cord is. I've used a lot of pumps with really flimsy cords that made me nervous, but this one is good. Alright, so looking at the instructions, there's supposed to be a cap that goes over the top of this, and the cap is missing. Yep, that's right. There was a missing part right off the bat. I searched the box a couple of times, couldn't find it, and if you go back and look at the video, which I did, you can see that it wasn't inside this chamber either. So I was left wondering, what the heck am I going to do to actually use this? Because those holes are far too big not to have a cover of some sort. I was hoping to use this thing right away because my phosphates were really concerning me, plus the toxins in the water from the gorgonians. So I called the vendor right away to see if they could send me out this part, and it turns out they couldn't because this unit is discontinued. However, I later found out that they are carried by Marine Depot if you think you might want to look into getting one. If you've watched my videos and you know me, you'll know that that was not going to stop me. I wanted to get this thing going right away, so I knew I would have to figure out a way to get these screens, or one of them, fastened to the acrylic sliding lid. I figured if I used aquarium sealant and put just a drop in each corner, it would hold the screen where it needed to be to stop the stuff from flowing out over the top. So that's what I did. I smoothed out the little drops and left it sit overnight to cure. I've used Phosphate off and on for years in all of my tanks, and I've always followed the directions and measured it very carefully using the right amount for the water volume. It's very easy to strip nutrients out of the water too quickly and shock your system. This is the carbon that I've used for many years, Reefgrrl. I like the large pellets because they're much less prone to create dust and small particles. I'm going to start with the carbon to see how my little screen works. So I'm just cleaning it here and getting it into the chamber, and now I've got it in a tub of water and I'm going to plug it in. This little Rio 90 does not strike me as being underpowered, but one thing I'm noticing is that carbon is floating right up to the top, and there is actually carbon outside of the grid and under the screen, and it's not going to be long before that carbon is going to be pushed over the edge. So although the silicone dots are holding the screen on there, it's not a tight enough fit to actually keep the carbon from flowing out. Fine media kit to the rescue. Here's the bigger sponge on top of the carbon, and it works like a charm. The carbon cannot flow out with it on top. After seeing that it was going to work, I put some Phosphate in and some carbon in, put the sponge on top, and plugged it in. And check it out, it is tumbling really nicely. But guess what? I saw there was a problem because my tank within about 10 minutes started getting cloudy. I learned that Phosphate is not supposed to tumble because it abrades the pellets and turns them to dust, and that dust gets everywhere in your tank and is not good for it. I made a couple of adjustments, thinking that the flow coming from the pump might be a little too strong and I wanted a way to turn it down. I decided to use this adjustable fitting. That dial there will change the amount of flow that can go through that pipe. So that was change number one. Using the Fine Media Kit sponges, the smallest one is at the bottom on top of the dispersion plate, which has small holes in it. Phosphate is on top of that, and the carbon is on top of the Phosphate. And the other sponge goes back on top of the carbon, except this time I won't be leaving any space between the carbon and the sponge. Alright, let's try this again. The fitting for the pump is wide open because I think it can handle a lot of flow given I have the sponges in there holding media in place. Hopefully that is. Alright, now we're flowing again and I do not see any tumble, so this is good, this is working. This white suction cup and bracket is to keep the reactor upright because it was tipping over. Now it's leaning against the baffle and it won't go anywhere, I hope. And coming back a half hour later to check, I don't see any cloudiness in the water, so obviously the lack of tumbling of the Phosphate has cleared that up. One other benefit for having the reactor in my return chamber is that it provides flow for the Fluval E300 heater. The water in this chamber really wasn't moving very fast, and every once in a while I would get the low flow indicator on the heater because detritus would build up around it. But with this extra flow coming from the reactor, I'm hoping that I won't see that again. Because it's a given that carbon will remove toxins from the water, I'm going to assume that it's doing its job in the reactor. Of more concern to me is the phosphates, and that's why I was hoping that using Phosphate in a reactor would help with that. So let's take a look at the results. I log my test results using an app called Aquarimate. This report starts July 23rd, which was when I installed the reactor, and you can see the downward trend in the phosphates. Then suddenly there's an upward swoop, and that's when I knew that I needed to replace the Phosphate, and so that's what I did. And then sure enough, it's starting to go down again. As of my most recent test, the phosphate level continues to drop, and it's now 0.153. From doing all this, it's clear to me that pushing the water through the media in a reactor does a better job than having the water passively flow over the media in a media bag. So I'm going to continue to let the reactor run and do its thing, and hopefully the phosphate levels will continue to drop. Having had no luck from Drs. Foster and Smith, from whom I bought this reactor originally, I emailed CPR Aquatic Inc. to let them know about the missing part. And did they ever come through? Within a week, it came in the mail, and here it is. So now I can run it with the screen underneath it the way it's supposed to be run. And now it's assembled with the media screen cap over top of the media screen, and it's ready to go back in the sump. But listen to how noisy it is. It was silent before. So now instead of the water simply flowing out of the top of the reactor, it's falling over a waterfall, and that's where the noise is coming from. This was just too loud, so I took the cap off again. Hear that? Yeah, exactly.